Hello everyone, welcome to another short video. In this video, we are going to look at authentication policy in Palo Alto Firewall. Before we jump onto the configuration of authentication policy, let's understand its purpose. So the purpose of authentication policy is to authenticate users before they can be granted access through the firewall. So if you look into my topology, this Linux machine, whenever going to internet, needs to authenticate to this Palo Alto firewall before it can be granted access. And yes, some traffic should be exempted from authentication, like DNS and the URLs or the IP addresses that belong to the authentication service itself. Now let's jump onto the firewall and see how to achieve the authentication. We will start from the configuration of the authentication portal. So in order to configure the authentication portal, you need to go device, user identification, and then authentication portal settings. Click on the gear shaped icon. You can see authentication portal is enabled. Idle timer is 15 minutes. So if a user stays idle for 15 minutes, authentication expires. And in overall 60 minutes as well, authentication expires. Now we need to attach a authentication profile to it. So it knows against what authentication profile I need to authenticate my user. So I already have a profile that authenticates against the local database of the firewall. I'll select that profile. If you can also use a SSL TLS service profile, so it will append a certificate to your authentication portal's URL. Okay, so if you want to use a certificate with your authentication portal, you need to create a SSL TLS profile for that and append it here. Other than that, there are two modes, transparent and redirect. Transparent mode is used when you have, vwire based deployment. And redirect is in redirect mode, how the stuff works is firewall redirects the original URL to the authentication portal, so users authenticate before they can be granted access. But in transparent mode, firewall just uses the same URL, but it will be taking user to a authentication portal. I'm gonna use the redirect mode, and then session cookie. Yes, I'm enabling the session cookie. Cookie's timeout is 1450 minutes and it is valid on roaming. Means when user moves from wireless to wired or basically changes its IP address, the cookie still stays valid. Redirect host. What host firewall will redirect the request to for the authentication? So that will be the IP address of any interface on the firewall. I'm going to use the LAN interface's IP address here, 10.0.0.1. And if you want to use certificates based authentication, then you need to append a certificate profile here. We are going to use the credential base, so I have put the redirect host here. And I'm not setting up the certificate authentication option. I'm not gonna use it. So hit OK. So now our authentication portal settings are complete. Next thing we have to do is we have to go to the network zones, enable the user ID on the zone where you want to authenticate the users. I've enabled the user ID on the zone. Now I need to enable response pages on that interface in order for this authentication to work. Let's go to interface management. Let's create a new profile. I will say ping and response pages. Let's enable network services ping and response pages and hit OK. After that, we need to append this profile to the interface which we have, put as whose IP address we have added in the authentication portal redirect option. So this is the interface. I'm going to append a profile to it. So you can see management profile has been attached. After that, we need to create an authentication enforcement object by going into object authentication. So there are three objects already present. One is a web form, which is a form on the browser itself. User puts in user ID and credentials and authenticates through that. Browser challenge is really the anti-alarm and the Kerberos space challenge, which is sent to the browsers, and then automatically credentials are fetched. This is basically used in terms of when you want to do the passive authentication. No captive portal or bypass. Let's click on the add button. Let's say auth demo. Let's create our own authentication enforcement object. Authentication method, I want to use web form. What authentication profile I want to use? Local user database auth with this authentication enforcement object. I'm going to keep this as default. Now, after that, okay, now we need to create a authentication policy. What traffic we really want to authenticate. So I'll say auth policy when from LAN zone going to WAN zone. Authenticate HTTP service. I'm just gonna authenticate the HTTP service. I'm not gonna authenticate HTTPS. Or let's take HTTPS as well. And then actions. Here you will bind your authentication enforcement object we created, auth demo. And the timeout for the authentication is 60 minutes. I don't want to set any logs, so I'll just set OK here. So now a rule is created to authenticate ATN 443 service. Now let's commit the changes. While the commit is in progress, I'll pause the video and come back. Okay, so my commit is now complete. I want to mention here that for the authentication logs, we will go to monitor, and under the authentication, our authentication logs will appear. Okay, and general traffic logs stay under the traffic section. Now let's go to the Linux machine, the client, and try to access something. I'll go to the Chromium and let's try to access the port quiz. Okay, you see, it redirected us to 10.0.0.1.6.0.8.1. That's on our Palo Alto firewall. And it didn't prompt me for the certificate because I accepted it in the past, so it knows. Otherwise, you will have a certificate error page where you have to accept and move ahead. Now let's put the credentials of the user. See, now I have moved on to the port quiz. Now let's check our logs. We go here, go to the authentication. There should be a log. You see, 10.0.0.10 user was authenticated, and then local database was this profile was used, and yep, event is authentication success. Rule was auth policy. Now let's access some more things in here and see. So let's see. I want to access web store. I want to access YouTube. Now let's see. So this authentication mechanism also helps firewall to get the user IP to user mapping basically. So if I go into the traffic logs, I'll be seeing my source user. You see, 10.0.0.10 who was authenticated, user authenticated. So it knows until or unless my authentication expires that this user, which is named as user, is logged onto that machine. I'll also show you. I created this user under users here, local user database user, and then I created a authentication profile here. We talked about authentication profiles when we were looking at the administrator management on the Palo Alto firewall. So I created this profile. It has 3 failed attempts and 5 minutes lockout. Then if you see here, local database here, and then in advanced, all users are able to authenticate through this who are part of the local DB. So that's it about the authentication policy on the Palo Alto firewall. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.